Thank you for joining us this evening, and welcome to our Q&A with Anita Diamant, author of Period, End of Sentence, a new chapter in the fight for menstrual justice. I'm Library Director Deborah Sears, and I'm excited to be here introducing to you what is going to be an interesting program about period poverty. If you don't already know, period poverty is the lack of access to sanitary menstrual products, hygiene education, and proper facilities. During tonight's conversation, we will hear from Anita Diamant and moderator Monique Van Pelt, CEO of Second Harvest of the Big Bend, about the challenges facing those who menstruate and what we can all do to help recognize and end period poverty in our own community. In conjunction with this event, Leon County has been collecting period products at all library locations to donate to Second Harvest to help raise awareness about period poverty. And I'm proud to say that we've collected hundreds of items to help those in need. So thank you to everyone who has donated. During tonight's event, we encourage you to submit questions for Anita and Monique through the Q&A feature of Zoom, and we will try to get to as many of them as possible. You will find the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. Now, I welcome Chairman Rick Miner to say a few words. Chairman?
Thank you, Deborah. Good evening, everyone. My name is Rick Miner. I'm the chairman of the Leon County Board of County Commissioners. I want to take a moment to thank Midtown Reader for their partnership and for continuing to host engaging author programs for all of us to enjoy. I'm happy to be here tonight for this conversation between Anita Diamant and Monique Van Pelt, who have each helped raise awareness about period poverty and its impacts on those who experience it. Period poverty affects an estimated 500 million people worldwide. In the United States, research indicates that 1 in 5 teens and almost 2/3 of women with low incomes struggle to afford period products. In response to this lack of access, Leon County government has taken steps to address this issue in our community. Earlier this year, we established the county's period poverty program, which makes menstrual products available at no cost in select public-facing restrooms and county facilities. So far, free menstrual products are available at the Leon County Courthouse, Fred George Park, Lee Voss Park, and the Leon County Main Library. Over the next few months, the county will continue to expand the program and make these products freely available to citizens who need them. Also, the city of Tallahassee and the school board have made tremendous strides in providing dispensers in a lot of their facilities. This is the result of some really tremendous group of community leaders, women who have been passionate in pushing for change. And Monique is certainly one of them. Jody Wilkoff, who's the chief of staff to the County District 3 office, is another. And many others of that team have really done a tremendous job in this community to increase public awareness and to change policy at the city of Tallahassee, Leon County, and the school district. Now, I know you all are very eager to hear from tonight's speakers, so let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Monique Van Pelt. Monique is CEO of Second Harvest of the Big Bend, the food bank serving 11 counties in North Florida. She's been actively engaged in the Tallahassee social service community since 2011, passionately working on social issues related to poverty. Most recently, she served as executive director of CESC, a nonprofit organization which operates a homeless shelter, 2 housing programs, and a healthcare and dental clinic. And last year, proud to say, she was named one of the 25 women you need to know by the Tallahassee Democrat. Welcome, Monique.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Miner. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here, and I had the esteemed pleasure of being able to introduce Miss Anita Diamant. Anita is a novelist, a journalist, an essayist, and has been an inspiration to women for decades. She's also the author of several guidebooks to contemporary Jewish life. She has published several novels, the first of which was The New Jewish Wedding, which was published in 1985. But she might be best known for The Red Tent, where Anita explored traditions and turmoil of ancient womanhood. And Anita, I want to pause there and tell you that in talking about tonight's interview and what we're doing together this evening, I talk about the book that we're going to be discussing, and I get a lot of nods, and I'm like, okay, it's the same author that wrote The Red Tent, and everybody's eyes light up, and they're like, this is just as early as today on a meeting with some of my board members. Several of the women were like, oh, I've read that in multiple book clubs over the last couple of decades. I mean, like that book was, it was profound and really touched a lot of women. So thank you for that. But now nearly 25 years later, she has released its encore, period, end of sentence, a new chapter, and the fight for menstrual justice. This book explores the cultural roots of menstrual injustice, which erodes self-esteem, it limits opportunity, and even threatens lives. The book celebrates a new generation of activists and innovators working to end poverty and stigma, and to steal from a recording of a video that you actually published, Anita. Something you said that kind of resonated with me was that this book is about how we think about and are changing the way that we think about menstruation, this most basic of all human functions, without which there would be no people, because it is essential to procreation. Anita, thank you so much for joining our community virtually. I'm just thrilled that you're here with us tonight.
It's entirely my pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So I thought that what we could maybe start with is a really abbreviated history of the work that's been done locally. So just in February of this year, a Galentine's Day virtual event, there were a number of elected officials in our community and business owners that came together to host a discussion after a period product drive, bringing attention to period poverty here in our community and worldwide. And it actually really caught a lot of interest of women and men and businesses and nonprofits around the community. And I want to have the chance to tell you a little bit about a young woman who is a youth in our community. Her name is Amaya Maya. She is the founder of a local nonprofit, a group called the Girl Flow. She's a student at one of our local high schools, Rickard High School, and she started the Girl Flow in October of last year when she was a sophomore in high school. The goal of her program was simply to provide period products to students who needed it and might not have had access, or perhaps had unexpected menstrual emergencies at school. So she worked to do two things: to collect and distribute period products, but also to raise awareness about the need. And it didn't start with her just doing this in her school. She actually brought the issue to our local Leon County School Board last spring and presented the issue, talked about what she was seeing in her school, and the board actually voted to partner with her and the Leon County Schools Foundation to work towards eliminating period poverty among Leon County students. And so Chairman Miner mentioned what has happened in a lot of our local public restrooms, but in our schools also, we're seeing that there are period product dispensers that are being set up in restrooms offering menstrual products at no cost to students. And the school district has actually budgeted to pay for refills. There's donation drives that go directly towards this cause, but it's been a really amazing thing to see happen, and really kind of being born from a youth of our community. And I don't know, I think that she was maybe going to be participating virtually in this. I'm not sure if we found her in the audience, but she might be popping in. If she doesn't, we will wave to her now. We're really proud of what she's done in our community. So I'd like to begin with a question just about some of your history. Could you talk to us a bit about how your parents discussed menstruation with you when you were young?
Not at all. Zero. I think I probably had a brochure from someplace, nothing that was given to me. And I learned about how to use period tampons in particular from friends. And I think that's a pretty typical experience for people in my generation. Not universal. There are plenty of families where this is discussed and where it was open. But my experience was not at all rare. And it's still the case that young women in the United States and elsewhere start their periods without even knowing what's happening to them. And it can be frightening, confusing, and without information, what do you make of this? So we are moving from that kind of silence around a very basic human function to the fact that a high school sophomore can stand before the school board and say, we need period products in the schools for my classmates who need them. So in the space of a couple of generations, we're moving actually mostly in the last, I would say, 8 to 10 years, much faster than than anyone could have imagined.
So, and you mentioned a couple of generations. So from like the silence that perhaps you experienced in your youth to what we see today, what do you think your, it not being discussed in your home or maybe with your particular generation, how did that, and what, through what lens did you look at menstruation through the last couple of decades up to being a part of this powerful initiative that's kind of taking hold worldwide?
Well, I have to say that the book was inspired by the movie, which is called Period at End of Sentence, which won an Academy Award for Best Short Feature in 2019, which is an organization that was that consists of high school students for the most part, who live in California and Hollywood, and who decided they needed to make a documentary about a project of theirs where they were donating something to a village in South India. And they asked me if I would be interested in writing a book about menstruation. So I started with much more knowledge than I had when I was 12 years old, but I spent my COVID year learning about menstrual injustice and period poverty and the roots of that and the way it's expressed and the way it hurts people for that year. So I learned as a journalist, really, and as a reporter and as a writer about this really complicated and profound issue, which begins with, in some ways, access to information, to knowing what's happening to your body.
I had the chance to watch that same documentary, and an element, there are so many aspects to that that can touch a viewer. Something that I loved was there was one character who was introduced, and she was so proud of the fact that in her culture, it is mostly like the brothers or the dads that are purchasing things for the women, but because she was empowered and had a job and had an income, her brother had come to visit, and she was able to buy him a suit, and she felt like a lot of pride in that. Did you see was there something about that video, that documentary, that spoke most to you, that made you feel like, I can't say no, I have to write about this?
So I knew about period injustice. I had actually written a couple of columns about sort of the worst case scenario in the world, where women in rural Nepal are exiled from their community while they're menstruating from their homes because of the belief that sleeping under the roof with a menstruating woman puts their family at risk and could actually cause the death of loved ones. So women and their young children would be exiled to sort of fend for themselves, and lived in huts and lean-tos and caves, and in several cases died of exposure and attacks by animals. And this was in the New York Times month after month for quite a while. So I had written about it. And I also found out at the same time about a student in my town who wrote an editorial for her school newspaper about the need for period products in her school. And one of the town elected officials read it, brought it before the school committee, and Brookline became, I think, the first municipality in the country to offer period products in every municipal building. And so those two stories, the sort of the worst case scenario where young women and women who menstruate are being sent out at risk to themselves and to their young children. And on the other hand, a young woman who is so empowered that she could write openly about this. And then she also testified before the town council. So those two extremes are kind of the poles of this book and of what I learned about menstruation.
And so in your lived experience, have you, are there times that you could talk about where you have faced some of the menstrual stigma that kind of are discussed in your book?
No, I can't say that. I come from a fairly privileged background, and while my parents weren't particularly able to discuss this, I'm sure that their parents didn't talk to them about it either. I went to a good school system. I read, I talked to friends, I learned, and I didn't face that stigma and had enough resources to be able to buy whatever I needed, without really knowing the biology of what was going on inside my own body, I have to say. I'm sure I had a health class. I do. I remember having a health class in junior high school, and the girls went to one room and the boys went to the other room. And I'm sure there was a film about this. But that's really not what I remember about learning about this. So it's not my lived experience, but as a woman, as a person with a uterus, I can empathize. And I have, like everybody who has menstruated, been caught without what I needed at some point, either at work or at school or getting from one place to another. And when you can't afford what you need, that is kind of a constant crisis. We know what that feels like when you need something and you don't know where to go for it. But if that's your monthly experience, it's tremendously stressful. And it limits energy and opportunity.
I think that's something, and I was surprised that this wasn't something I had known, but that if for families who use EBT cards or SNAP, that you can't purchase tampons or pads. There's no menstrual product that you can purchase with that. Right. And I'd never considered the limitations of that particular federal program.
I don't know if that's been changed yet. I think it was changed for diapers, but that was true for diapers also for a long time. It's certainly under conversation. If it hasn't been changed yet, I hope it will be changed soon. But that also, what that shows you is this notion that menstrual products are not necessities. So that makes them a luxury, right? Of course, they're not a luxury. They're necessities. And as necessities, they need to be provided in public spaces. I mean, nobody's walking around with a roll of toilet paper. That is provided in public facilities. And menstrual products need to be understood and seen as just as necessary as toilet paper. And that analogy, that comparison has convinced almost everybody I've talked to, men, women, old, young. And if you ask, are you carrying around a roll of toilet paper? When they say, well, why don't they buy it themselves? It's just as necessary as toilet paper, as a place to wash your hands, as a place to dry your hands and get rid of the materials that you need to get rid of. So people are really waking up to this, I think.
I was equally surprised reading about the menstruating while incarcerated, and this thought of a mother needing to choose between calling home to speak to her children and purchasing products that she needs because she's menstruating while in prison or in jail. And so your book kind of revealed that their laws have passed where at federal institutions they are available, but at state and local prisons they are not. And that was something that really that hit me hard.
Yeah. And I have to say that while it's a federal regulation, that doesn't mean it's being enacted in all federal facilities. And it's a state by state thing about making them available, making products available, and not just available. In some places that's meant buying them. And again, if you have very limited funds and you have to take care of other things, this is going to be a problem. And if you bleed through your uniform in some places, you are punished or docked whatever little pay you make, so you can't afford them again. So it's the cost of being female, of having a uterus, of being a woman, and of being less powerful, of living in a patriarchal society that doesn't see women as fully human in some ways. That's a very big, broad statement, but that's at the bottom of all this shame and pain.
I couldn't help but walk away from your book feeling that same sentiment, that the root issue here is a patriarchal society. So as someone has the capacity to go to a board and talk about benefits for staff, the discussion on menstrual leave was really eye-opening for me, thinking about that. And as a woman at work, struggling through my days sometimes. But your book posits this question, like, is menstrual leave progressive or is it regressive? And the split with even the feminist community on their thoughts about that. I'm not, if you are comfortable sharing where you kind of fall on that or how that conversation has looked as you've traveled virtually our nation. What are you hearing about?
In the world, I want to say. the argument against asking for menstrual leave is that this is becomes an excuse for not letting women achieve, not promoting them. This is, they're not capable. They can't compete. They can't hold up their end of the bargain that men can do every month because they don't have the menstrual periods. And this fear of losing what has been gained in the past 50 years since the feminist revolution, this wave anyway, the second wave, is genuine. What I found really interesting is that this is a generational split, and younger people are much more open to this idea. And I have to say that I've come to see, I've been convinced by the idea that menstrual leave is something that needs to be discussed and considered and enacted in different ways in different places. There are people who monthly have migraine headaches and or have a really seriously bad day of cramps. And the idea that you have to use your sick leave for something that is actually pretty common, pretty normal, doesn't necessarily happen every month. And there are some large companies that have enacted menstrual leave. And whenever one does that, it makes the New York Times. So it's still a news story whenever a large corporation does that. Nike has it on their books. They've had it on their books for years. I don't know how well it's enforced, but the thing that I think is that I think in the workplace, everybody is treated as though we were all the same, that we're widgets, right? That nobody's really different from anyone else, and you should be able to perform exactly the same way. But we're not widgets. We have families that we need to take care of. We have bodies that we need to take care of. And that means that in an enlightened workplace, in an enlightened understanding of work and the body, menstrual needs would be taken into account. And so some places are instituting like 12 days of the year are menstrual leave. If you want to take it, you can. You don't have to. It can mean if you are able to work at home for part of a day, that's fine. And that if menstrual leave is on the books, then maybe you can actually go to your supervisor and say, it's bad this month and I'm going to need, I really do need to stay home and I will do what I can from work. Of course, this is harder if you do manual labor of any kind. But even there, if it starts, since period products have become something people can talk about without too much ooh anymore, or it's changing very rapidly, that I hope that menstrual leave is something we can talk about in the future as well. And we are starting to. And the fact that younger women are more comfortable with this than older women, I think is very hopeful.
Yeah, I agree. So there's a 1,000 different things that someone could walk away from your book. I took notes at every chapter of things like aha moments and highlighted it. I feel bad, my staff, I walked down the hallway popping in offices, reading lines for like, did you know?
You can't make a writer more happy than hearing that it's useful.
They would just turn in their seats or like another one when you but there were so many great moments in the book and so many ideas that even as someone who menstruates, I had never taken that, there's not an invitation sometimes to even think about that. And this book invites you to pause and think about your body and to think about something that like for me has happened since I was 8 years old. Wow. And so I'm wondering if there's anything in particular that you hope that readers walk away from your book holding.
I think two things: outrage and hope. I think there's a lot to be outraged about, things that I might have sort of known, but finding stories, examples, and statistics about the ways that that poor women who work in agriculture suffer enormously, and that women of color in this country in particular are often, their pain is dismissed, and that not just around menstrual pain, but other things as well. Just suck it up and take another Tylenol and you'll be fine. And I can't tell you the number of people. There's a story in there from a gynecologist, a wonderful gynecologist, who went to her gynecologist as a kid, and her female gynecologist told her, "Oh, it's nothing. Just, you'll grow out of it." And in fact, she actually had a condition that caused a lot of pain and should have been taken care of earlier. And this doctor with great compassion said, I'm sure that my physician did not have any training in this when she was in medical school. And we're shifting here too. When you see people talking about menstruation as the fifth vital sign, like blood pressure and your pulse and your temperature, menstruation for people who menstruate is a vital sign. How is it? So when you go see your primary care person, they should in fact be asking you, how's your period? Are you having trouble? Are you having pain? Is it changed? And these are just basic questions that go right to the question of health. So there's outrage and there's hope because of young people, because of people like you, because of people who are willing to also not just, it's really important to provide products, and providing products and donating products is good in and of itself. It's also good because it spreads the word that people start talking about period products and stop having that sort of reaction of we're not supposed to talk about that. And it also raises the question of policy, which I'm delighted to hear that in Tallahassee has been brought before the authorities and are making progress on this. And that is happening more and more. I think it's pretty great that in both municipal buildings already, in the library, and hopefully in every school soon, there are free period products. I think that speaks really highly to the people who organized and to the people in power who are listening. So bravo.
There was a member of my team at one point who had, she had been seeing a chiropractor regularly and was experiencing lots of abdominal pain. And she ended up going to a medical professional who thought that the chiropractor had injured her back and had prescribed medication, had done x-rays, had done, to the point that she was in so much pain. She was 22 at the time. She was using a cane. And then started journaling. They wanted her to journal what was making things bad. And she started seeing a pattern that it was around once a month she would feel this way. And it turns, this went on for 2 years and she missed work. She didn't know what was wrong with her. She, the emotional distress of this experience, it was endometriosis. And that was nothing that they had ever considered even looking at. And I talked about that particular example with a friend yesterday, and she pointed out, like, who I'm describing was a white female, but my friend pointed out, like, had this been a woman of color, what that experience might have been like. And I hadn't also put this in perspective of a person of color and their experience in the medical world. And how many more hurdles there might be. So I really appreciated that being highlighted in your book.
No, and endometriosis is very underdiagnosed. And there's a really shocking statistic in the book about medical students not so long ago, sometime in the 2010s. And some 20% of them believed that Black people didn't suffer pain as much as white people. And if that's happening now, and that means that perhaps your provider, perhaps unconsciously, is still operating under that means that Black women's endometrial pain goes on longer and longer undiagnosed, more than white women who present at their. But endometriosis is largely underdiagnosed, and menstrual distress in general is underdiagnosed and we don't know as much about it as we ought to. I mean, there's Gloria Steinem in 1974 wrote this very funny essay about what the world would look like if men menstruated. And she said women wouldn't be allowed in the military or in medical school because, they weren't so good at dealing with blood. And that if men menstruated, there would have been a national association of dysmenorrhea. There would have been a huge amount of money put into figuring out how to solve the pain that men experience during menstruation. Well, we haven't had that. There is no National Academy of Dysmenorrhea, and there's not a lot of money poured into figuring out the causes and how to help people who menstruate be taken care of appropriately.
A question you had asked me when we met last week before this interview, we were talking about what successes Tallahassee has seen, and you said, why do you think that's the case? And I'd said, I think it's because we have a lot of women who are in power, and the people who menstruate are thinking of this and have the capacity and authority to enact change. And so I do wonder if, maybe we won't have an academy surrounding this particular work, but maybe we're moving in the right direction as we see more females or people who've been straight in power.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't think it's probably not a coincidence that Scotland and New Zealand and Ireland, who are all countries with female heads of state, have some of the most progressive policies. Ireland completely abolished, has enacted, oh my gosh, no, Scotland has passed a law to put free menstrual products in all public institutions in the country. They're in the process of figuring out how to do that, but that is now law there. So it's no longer whispered about as much as before, but there's still so many people suffering in silence and in shame. And, menstruation has been called the curse for a long time, but menstruation isn't the curse. The real curse is shame, which keeps people from talking about, learning about, and understanding, and even celebrating the fact that the menstrual cycle is part of a healthy reproductive system.
There was a number of ways that you showcased how menstruation is celebrated or shamed in cultures across the world, both historically and current day. And I thought it was remarkably enraging to hear the way that some women or people who menstruate are treated. And then others, there was the tribe that you discussed, and the first menstruation of a young girl is she's thought to have powers, and her responsibility to her community is to make a blessing for every person. And I didn't know if as you wrote this book, what was the most interesting cultural or religious attitude about menstruation that you encountered, or maybe even since then?
Well, what I learned in the book, we'll do a little red tent moment here. When I wrote the Red Tent, which is a retelling of the biblical story of Dinah, who's the daughter of Jacob and Leah, one of the patriarchs, and I created in my mind this red tent, that would be the place that women would retire to during their periods, during childbirth and illness. And it was known, everybody knew what was going on. It was in the center of the village. And over the years, people have said how much they wish they'd had a red tent. And I've had to say, I made that up. But I knew there had been menstrual tents and huts historically. But then doing the research for this book, I learned about a tribe in northern Pakistan that actually has essentially a red tent, a bashali, that's the name of this red tent. And women go once a month, and the anthropologist who wrote the book about it, who's a woman, was allowed inside, and she compared it to a slumber party. Women took care of each other. They took off their beautiful necklaces that were gorgeous but heavy, and they drank tea, and they took naps, and they gossiped, and they also passed on knowledge to younger women. So I thought, well, goodness, there really is such a thing as the red tent. But what I learned also is that in other cultures, for example, Native American cultures, indigenous cultures, and cultures in the South Pacific, New Zealand, the Maori, for example, there had been beautiful traditions about first periods, which were celebrated by the people in their community. And as they were colonized by white Christians who took over the land from them, these beautiful and very life-affirming ceremonies and celebrations were stamped out as primitive and dirty, and this caused tremendous pain and loss in those communities. But in the past few years, women in those communities have reclaimed these ceremonies, studied them, learned them, and not just and reinvented them for modern use in a way, and made them both traditional and contemporary, so that young girls could in fact experience this in a way that was available to them. So there's a lot of history that we don't know, because a lot of it was wiped out. But in some cases, people are relearning, reclaiming, excavating their histories that had been lost to them, taken away from them. And there's a lot to learn from that, I think. And then in the United States, people are having parties to some extent for first periods. This is not common, but it's definitely out there. And in some cases, kids just gather their friends and have a cake and goof around. And in some cases, parents just flowers and chocolate and toasting with grape juice at dinner. In some cases, of course, since this becomes a thing, you can now buy period party stuff. You can buy, balloons that look like uteruses and cookies that look like tampons. And so there's a market for this as well. So, and they're great. I've read great stories and heard great stories from people about just being, their moms taking their daughter after their first period or during it out for lunch, just the two of us, making a special day and acknowledging it and celebrating it and not hiding it from the men in the family, the boys and the men in the family either, and acknowledging it. And this is just the newest thing in her life. And aren't we glad?
I did not have a period party. When I started, my mother was out of the country. And so my dad met me at my bus stop, and he like scooped me into his arms and he's like, welcome to the club. And he's like, I'm not in the club, but it's growing bigger every day. And then he handed me off to a neighborhood friend, a mom, and she took me to her home, and the nurse had given me a pad at school, but then didn't tell me how to use it. And so the only thing that made sense to an 8-year-old as I opened it, was like, oh, I stick the sticky part to myself. And so it was another mother like trying to educate like a young girl on how this happens. What do you think that for moms that might be watching this or dads that might be watching this, how do you feel parents could best talk to their, for me, an elementary school age or a middle school age child about menstruation, a boy or a girl?
Well, let me just stop for a second. I want to talk about your dad. Stories like that, there are a lot of stories like that of dads just being great, of grandfathers also just saying welcome to the club in one way or another. And those stories need to be shared. I mean, it's not heroic. That's normal. That should be normalized. And that rather than, looking away and saying, don't tell me, I don't want to know anything about this. I don't want, I'm not going to the store. And there's several wonderful stories in the book about men behaving beautifully. And I'm just going to tell one of them, which is the cab driver in South Africa who shuttled kids to and from school and noticed one day bloody tissues on the floor in the back, and he figured out what was happening. So instead of getting upset about it, he went out and bought pads and put them on the dashboard and said, anybody who needs these, they're free, just take them. And when the boy started making, noises, he said, stop it. And he was just behaving like a regular human being. He was on television and he said, everybody should do this. Every cab should have these. This is just normal. So the more we normalize it, the more we celebrate good behavior as opposed to snicker about bad behavior. I think that's important. I think parents have the great opportunity to say, if you have any questions, ask me. I'm happy to talk to you about anything. And if I don't know the answer, we'll go look for it ourselves. We'll go together and find out. And letting kids know what happens to the human body, what happens to bodies with uteruses, what happens to bodies with penises is important. And to that end, so there's the family, but not all families are comfortable talking about this to this very day. In school, I want to talk about health education for just a minute and the importance of putting everybody in the same room for a good part, if not all, of their health education around the reproductive system. And it's important because then everyone has a shared language to talk about what's happening. And there's no mysteries and it's not shameful. It's just, this is the biology of human reproduction, and menstruation is part of it. And this is how it happens. And this is what it can feel like. And a lot of people say, well, but the boys will laugh and everyone will be uncomfortable. And it's like, that they do that anyway, don't they? And if you're the teacher, you do just say, calm down. And if there are questions that are too difficult to ask out loud, there should be a question box, which is always better than asking children to ask questions that are embarrassing to them or confusing to them, or perhaps they're experiencing some kind of violence at home that has to do with their reproductive systems. They're not going to talk about that in class. You put it in a box. So that's sort of there's a lot of resistance to doing this, and there's a lot of resistance to health education in general. But talking to health educators, it seems very clear to me that we could save people a lot of pain and trouble if we just taught this and started teaching early. 5th grade is when you start teaching about the human body, and you start doing it before it's really part of you. It becomes less charged. So I didn't answer your question, but.
No, and I appreciate that. But so the responsibility within schools, so the, anatomy education, sex education, what do you think the responsibilities should be in schools for ending period poverty?
Well, putting products in the bathrooms is really important, and it's happening everywhere. And the leadership tends to be young people. I just want to say that on college campuses, it's organizing, young women organizing on college campuses of every kind. Ivy League, small, tiny parochial schools, state colleges are going to the administration and saying we need products in the bathrooms. And they are, for the most part, getting them. There's not a lot of resistance anymore. And that being public about it. And on campuses, there are drives for products. There are drives for changing the rules, and everybody sees it. The men see it, the boys, everybody of every gender sees these signs. Again, it normalizes what's going on. So you're sort of this beautiful case in point. You've been doing these wonderful collections of products, and they go into the work that you're doing, Monique. And that's important because it gets the word out and it gets products into the hands it needs it. And you've changed policy, and you're making it something, and that's going to be paid for by the municipality. So there has to be an end to collecting these things, because like toilet paper, it belongs everywhere, and whoever pays for the toilet paper pays for the period products. So that's where we're heading, I think.
We hope.
You're heading there, aren't you? I mean, everything you just said, it sounds like it happened really quite quickly in town.
And I think that we had a great opportunity to learn about like a sister city in the state of Florida, and their efforts that mirrored our efforts, but the traction that we got here locally we've seen gains and successes. We've taken strides as a community that other cities that have worked at these things for a decade haven't seen. Actually, Dr. Michelle Gale, who's assistant superintendent of Leon County Schools, she just posted saying LCS has free period products. Our secondary schools have dispensaries as well. So they're engaged enough to even be watching this with us.
Right,
so
exactly.
And really engaged people.
One of the great things that I learned was the power of an individual to organize. So there's one woman in Toronto, in Ontario, who, because she ran into a homeless woman and it occurred to her, what does she do when she has her period? Started to make a collection of drives. She started a nonprofit. She approached city council. She approached the school committee, and now the whole it's not a state. What is it in Canada? The province of Ontario is providing period products because she started it, and she recruited people to help her, including women on the school committee and on the city council. And so the ability of one person to say, this can't stand, we have to change this, and then organizing with other people. And she couldn't do it by herself, but the media picked up on it, and she got support from all sorts of local organizations as well, women's organizations for the most part. But they started and put products in the homeless shelters and in day programs for people who didn't have anywhere else to go. So it's become normalized in the whole province. It's a large populated place. So it does happen and it does change. And every example that shows that we can make this change My hope is that young people who have this experience of organizing and seeing things change will make them feel empowered in other parts of their lives to take on injustice and say, we can do better than this.
So I agree, children, there's so much that they can do, but I want to turn that around and point it back at you. So we have someone that's commented to say, I just wanted to comment that many of us were raised to feel shame of our periods, and I carried this shame into adulthood until she read your book, The Red Tent, which changed her life. She went on to say, I'm so grateful to her. Thank you for this event. It is such a joy to see her live. Work done by individuals like yourself, taking a hard look at this, researching, telling the story, giving voice to this. Thank you for what you've done also.
Oh, thank you. That's really great. You know, people have seen this as a through, I think you said sort of a through line from The Red Tent to this. It was not intentional, but pretty much everything I've written as a journalist and in fiction certainly are about women's agency, women's strength, not seeing women as victims, and taking seriously their efforts and the power of their friendships as well. And so this is part of that through line of talking about what women live through, what they shouldn't have to live through, how they can change, and how strong we are, and smart.
I love that. So another comment that came through, and this kind of is tied into the voice of women. So this participant said, the menstruation chapter really stood out to me because of the misconceptions adult men have about periods. What can we do to teach them about menstruation?
Yeah, there's some real howling, funny, weird things. There's a woman who posted on Facebook, you know, tell me the weirdest thing, the strangest, stupidest thing a man has ever said to you about your period. And there's just whoppers. You know, one of my favorites was a woman who'd been married for 6 years, told her husband she was having her period. And he said to her, again? So, I know. And there are funny, and there are terrible, mean ones, and there are ridiculous ones. And there's one man who thought that every period, a woman basically ejected a small egg the size of a Cadbury Easter egg kind of chocolate thing. And that was the end of it. That was a period. So that's a tremendous lack of knowledge and understanding. And again, we have to talk about it honestly. We have to laugh about it. There's a lot of humor in this book. And I think one way to get rid of shame is to laugh at the absurdity of this, that this is not having a period is not shameful. It's human. And it's celebrated in some cultures. And people need to call a spade, to call a period, to say I'm having cramps. There's a great commercial, which will never be seen in America. I think it was Australian, about periods, and a woman stands up at a dinner party, a mixed company, and she says, does anyone have a tampon? And that's what we're moving towards, right? So that it's just no big deal. It's like, who's got a tissue? Who's got a tampon? Whether it's mixed company or not. So that's my dream. That's normal. It's so normal.
Yeah. There was sorry to keep pulling in my own life into this, but there's just been so much that this rang true for me. I remember this vividly from like middle school or early high school, but a guy in my high school or middle school said, I don't trust something that bleeds for 7 days and doesn't die. And
that's a good one. That goes in that list of terrible things.
But this girl, like my age, was so like prepared for that. She came right back and she's like, if something can bleed for 7 days, I'd call it magical. Or like if something could bleed for 7 days and not die, I'd call it magical. Right. And it was just like such a beautiful reframe. And it also like took him out at his knees, which, you know, I loved.
Yes. And it made fun of it too. It mocked the nonsense of what he was saying. And I think that that's a very positive and gentle way to destroy somebody, or their argument with, like, you know, and, you know, people who wear T-shirts that say, I can do anything you can do while I'm bleeding, and stuff like, which is really quite outrageous. But it's not just, and I want to say that this is happening globally. In India, a few years ago, there was a sign put up on one of the temples that women above a certain age weren't allowed inside because they might be menstruating. And there was this enormous response to this. There was like women stood in a line that was miles and miles long with signs that said, I'm menstruating and it's not a disease. And it just became viral. A lot of it instigated by a young college student who went online. Social media has been a tremendous source of organizing and learning, and a lot of misinformation too, but there's great information online that didn't exist certainly when I was growing up. If you find that's one thing parents can do, I think, actually, is to curate what information their kids, at least offer them a list of websites and say, I don't know all of this, but these two fun lady gynecologists have really a lot of information. And if you have any questions that I can't answer, you should go there. And there's actually a lot of websites by young girls as young as 13 and 14 to talk to their peers about what they've learned. So as dangerous as social media can be and as much information as there is out there, there are tremendous resources, especially if you don't have an adult to turn to necessarily, or somebody you trust, or any of that. So there's ways to get information too that parents can actually help their kids get good information.
I love that. This is excellent. We have Miss Amaya Maya has made her way to our comment section. And so she says this: first, I want to say that I'm inspired so much by your book and advocacy. What would you continue to tell those that are in the menstrual equity space?
I think we need to remember how connected to all sorts of issues menstruation is. That the menstrual space is actually an intersection of it's worse if you're poor, it's worse if you're a person of color, that menstruation can be a catastrophe if you're in a refugee camp, or if you're in prison, or if you're in a homeless shelter, or if you're on the street. So that any of those issues intersect with period poverty. I think that's so I tend to use the word period injustice because it's bigger. It's not just, it includes certainly making sure that everybody has what they need, and that includes clean water, and that includes products that eventually are less problematic for the climate, and safe bathrooms, and real bathrooms with locks on the door so they are safe. All of that stuff is also part of the conversation we're having. So period poverty tends to get focused very, very much just on the products, but I think we need to see it as part of a larger issue. There are people who think it's not a good thing to talk about products because it's too small. There's a big issue, but I think it's a great way to start a much bigger conversation about the way people with uteruses are treated, and all the other issues that intersect around this one as well.
Thank you.
That's complicated, but it's not really complicated. It's just to remember that this is not just about making sure that everybody has the pads and tampons they need.
Right. So we don't be too narrow in the way that we think about this. So we have 6 minutes left. I've got 2 questions. At the conclusion of the chapter, Period Poverty and Tampon Tax, you posit that we are at a turning point where you can look around that proverbial corner and see the destination ahead. What do you think that destination is?
Well, there are a couple of destinations. One is that there are going to be period products in all public spaces for free. And that includes your public library and the museum that you visit. If there's a beach bathroom someplace, they're everywhere. That it's not, nobody needs to be without what they need. Okay, so there's that. then in the longer view, there is normalizing the human body and the female body and the body that bleeds, that this is not a body that is to be afraid of or to be ashamed of, but it is human, and that's really recognizing the full humanity of women. And that we've got a long way to go before we get to that. But I really see this as part of that longer, much more profound change in human society. It's a human thing. It's global. It's a global issue. And if we can see one another as on this journey together, I think it's helpful to understand that our struggles in this country are connected to struggles in other parts of the world where girls go to school and stay home from school because they have no products, where girls stay home from school once they start their period because their parents are afraid that they're going to be attacked or they're going to be seen as marriageable. So or they stay home from school because their parents can't afford to send them to school anymore, whether or not they have period products. So all of these things are connected. So, and that can feel overwhelming, but we're taking steps. So you can't feel overwhelmed. I mean, we are doing things. We're talking about it, aren't we? And we're making changes. So we're part of a larger journey to justice.
And so it can feel big and overwhelming. What gives you the greatest confidence in the future of this initiative?
What's the name of young lady at the school?
Amaya.
Amaya is the person who gives me confidence. It's junior high school girls going to the principal and saying, we need products. And he says, no, people will take advantage, and they go home and make tampon cookies, that look just like tampons. And they go on, it gets shared 1 million times on Twitter, and he's forced to change his mind. So that's 12 and 13-year-old kids making change. And so I have tremendous faith in young women. And we have, lots of models of these people. We have Greta, and we have Malala, and we have Emma. They're one-name wonders at this point, and there are others. And we need to name them, and we need to honor them, and we need to follow them. So that's what gives me tremendous hope.
That's beautiful. And Deborah hasn't popped in to stop me, so I'll ask one final one. What do you think should be our community's biggest priority to help end period stigma and period poverty here? What is your parting remark to Tallahassee? What's our marching order? Tell us.
You're marching. I don't think you need me to tell you what to do. I think you're marching just fine. I love that you're reaching out to other sister cities, I think you called it. I think it's important that you shine a light on what you're doing, that look what's possible. See, we're the city in Florida, and this is what we've done. So this is doable. I think sharing good stories, those stories about the great dads and the great men, sharing progressive policies in place that then you're showing that it can be done. And I think that's something you might want to think about, that you might want to make sure that people are reading about you, seeing TV stories about you, media stories about you, posting online, and making sure that your example is an example.
Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much, Anita and Monique, for that fascinating and informative discussion about period poverty. And I have got to say, by far, you have probably had the most amazing COVID year, Anita. Thank you. This is a huge contribution. For our viewers, you can find a recording of this program on the Leon County Public Library Facebook page and our YouTube channel. We do hope that you will share it with friends and family members who will help carry on the conversation about addressing period poverty in our community. For more information about Leon County's upcoming events and programs, follow us on social media. And thanks again for joining us. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening. Good night.
Good night.